Hello. I'm just going live about the new Arctic News Blue Ocean event blog post, and I'm I'm outing myself. Hello. I'm discussing the new Arctic News blog post. Feel free to check it out. It is a insanely warm sea surface temperature in February in the Arctic. 21 degrees Celsius is 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe yeah, it's hard for me to believe. But if anybody wants to talk about this, I think we should talk about it now before we lose civilization. I mean, I realized we were doomed by 1996, and I've posted the link. Hello, feel free to say hi in the chat. I'm just discussing the latest data of sea surface temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic in February. Um, if anybody knows anything about the northern winter, it's not supposed to be 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic in February. Something's seriously wrong with that temperature. And um if you read the Arctic News blog post, they're saying that essentially that there's been a strong wind and that's caused an actual decline in the sea ice extent in the middle of the winter in the Arctic when it's supposed to be increasing, which is unheard of unless we're approaching a serious tipping point. They're the blog post author, who I think is Professor Maria Carmen Solana, based on her previous blog posts on that Arctic News blog. And then she started posting as Sam Carana. But anyway, um, the problem being that this can then unleash the methane tipping point because there's 1,200 gigatons of pressurized methane in the world's largest ocean shelf, the East Siberian Arctic Shelf. And Paul Beckwith just covered the latest study by Natalia Shakova, and she was one of the co-authors documenting that indeed the methane is accelerating out of the world's largest ocean shelf into the atmosphere. Um, and there's already more methane coming out of the East Siberian Arctic Shelf than the rest of the permafrost on the land in the Arctic, and already more methane coming out of the ESAS than the East Siberian Arctic Shelf than the rest of the oceans combined in the world. And yet the IPCC actually dismisses the East Siberian Arctic Shelf methane as not a not a concern at all, and says, well, maybe like in 100 years it'll be a problem. That's literally what they say, because that's relying on computer models. And the latest Natalia Shakova paper says those computer models are not accurate. They've been debunked by her research, and that's been corroborated by international research expeditions. So there's also the brand new study that Guy McPherson's cited on his latest video upload, that it's been proven now that a 1 degree Celsius increase in heat causes a farmer net income loss of like 68% or something like that, 66%. So, and farmers, their net income is pretty much next to nothing already for most farmers. Like in the US, the in 2021, the IRS reported the net farm income was $210 for the whole year. So you take a 65% loss on $210. I mean, you basically have like some years you have a negative net income. Hello, I'm just discussing the eco doom situation, the science, and feel free to chime in with any comments or questions. But there's a brand new Arctic News blog post. I put the link in the chat, and they have documented a 70-degree Fahrenheit sea surface temperature in February in the Arctic. And to me, this is like it's it's hard to believe. It's totally stunning. Like, how can you have 70 degrees Fahrenheit water temperature in the middle of the winter in February in the Arctic? I mean, I lived in Alaska and in well 30 years ago, 34 years ago, but it was 20 below 0 Fahrenheit, which is I think that's the same in Celsius at that point. But that's like deadly cold weather and like frostbite in a few minutes kind of weather. And so 70 degrees Fahrenheit, basically the ocean, they're saying it's because the ocean temperature is so hot and because the wind is blowing the hot ocean temperature into the Arctic, and it's actually causing the sea ice extent to melt, which is unheard of in the middle of the winter. The sea ice is supposed to be increasing, not decreasing. And the link gives the graphs, but the author, who I think it's Professor Maria Carmen Solana, but she posts under Sam Carana, and she's basically saying, well, this could definitely be a blue ocean event because if you look at the ice volume for the Arctic, it's mainly like 3 feet, 3 feet or less for most of the Arctic. Some of it is 4 feet. It's probably about 90% 4 feet or less. Um, and which like I live in the northern Midwest. I live in one of the coldest states in the lower 48 in the US and in Minnesota. So we don't right now, we haven't had any winter. We had like 2 weeks of winter. I mean, we've had to shut down like all the ice fishing. People have been falling through the lakes right and left. They're having to be rescued. They had to cancel the ice pond tournament, the international pond hockey tournament. They had to cancel the winter festival. All the like if you want to ski, they gotta have snow machines. It's anyway. And then I just already mentioned the Guy McPherson, the brand new physics article saying that like they're already saying, well, the farmers are starting to freak out because it's like if it's this hot in the wintertime, then obviously people are starting to realize that the summer when you have to grow food, that's not good. So it's quite amazing that even on the supposed global warming YouTube channels that I listen to, they mainly talk about what's going to happen in 5 years or but actually it's really like what's going to happen this summer or it's already summertime in the southern hemisphere, so they're already experiencing fires and drought. But like the UN already predicted for this year, the UN predicted there's going to be over 40 million people in a food emergency crisis in Africa. Last year it was over 20 million in for the Horn of Africa because they had drought for 7 of 8 of the rainy seasons, and then they had flash flooding, so they can't farm in either conditions. And so the UN was like, we cannot get enough funding for the World Food Program for to feed the Horn of Africa, it was over 20 million. Now they're saying it's going to be over 40 million this year. So if they couldn't get enough funding for over 20 million, then how are they going to get the funding this year for over twice as many? And then it's gonna get it's it's gonna get really crazy fast because all the money obviously is going into the military spending because you got to have these military CEOs making $300 million or $30 million a year because how can you if you're not making 30 million a year, how can you afford to live? You need several houses, like, you gotta have, like, 7 houses, right? Like, if you're Taylor Swift or whatever. Alright, I posted the link in the chat if anybody has any comments. I'm gonna repeat what I started the video on. There's a brand new Arctic News blog post on how it's been 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic in February, the sea surface temperature, which is like almost impossible to believe because usually it's like 20 below zero Fahrenheit. Hey, Irma. Um, yeah, I'm outing myself as a doomer. I know I've been a big part of the eco doom scene on YouTube, but just to give my background, I started doing environmental activism when I was in high school in the 80s. And that's like when Sting came out, like concerned about the rainforest. And I discovered Winona LaDuke's articles in a free local newspaper at the library, and she was a big Native American activist. And then I had this really cute female come to my house doing environmental activism. Like, okay, I got to get into this. And so then my first job I set up like recycling in my high school. I started bicycling to high school, which is across the city. I became vegetarian for environmental reasons and ethical reasons. And then I yeah, my first full-time job was working for Citizens for a Better Environment, going door to door, asking for donations. I was good at it, even though I was the youngest worker. I consistently made quota. But the last day, I was laughing nonstop. I went out with another musician friend, and we could not stop laughing. We would ring someone's doorbell, and we would just bust out laughing because we were having such a fun time because we were both like blissed out in joy from music. And then we played music together. And he's a professional music teacher now. He does Celtic music. Anyway, so then so that was 1989, and then 1990 I moved to Alaska, and I lived in the wilderness for 4 months with no electricity, not even a cell phone. 1990. The closest phone was two miles away. We hauled water by bucket for 26 sled dogs. We were living just south of the steepest mountain in the world, Denali. Um, the guy who homesteaded the place, he had traveled all over the world, lived all over the world. He worked as a mercenary, a mountain climber. He was a bit dangerous. We left when there was 6 feet of snow in December. The temperatures were consistently 20 below zero Fahrenheit. We split wood and lived by wood heat. And then, hey, anybody joining in? Okay, lost everybody. I'm just rambling. I'm going over my history because most people know me for like meditation, but I've just been an environmental activist mainly. I haven't. Well, see, I went where I was living was not technically the Arctic, but it was by Denali, so it was tundra, and I had to go. They call it Blaze Trail, and the guy who hosted the place, he literally gave me a team of sled dogs. No, he sent me out on snowshoes, and he goes, "Okay, you're gonna go make a trail for the sled dogs to train the sled dogs," and it's like it was all just bogs. It was bogs and tundra, like tundra being like tamarack and pine trees and whatever, and you can't tell one lake from another. You can't make headway. You have no idea where you are. And I literally thought I was gonna die because I'm like, how am I gonna find my way back? He gave me a little hand sketch map, and I just like steeled myself. You gotta like steel your nerves, and I went for it. And then he was actually happy with what I did. He's like, "Yeah, you made the trail. I got back. I actually accomplished what I was supposed to do." I couldn't believe it. I'm nice. Sweet. You actually went to Cuba. That's awesome. I had a friend who went to Cuba, and I lived in a house with him. My friend from high school, and then he got into activism. Actually, my boss went to Cuba too when I worked in organic. You having a hard time posting? Why? Because you got to type with one finger. You actually cut sugarcane. My brother-in-law, he cut sugarcane growing up in Central America when he was a kid. That's what he did for work. So okay. Anyway, So I went on. I basically I became a full time activist, and I was pretty famous in the Twin Cities as a. Oh yeah, right. I ended up I got we had a big FBI file, and in Madison, Wisconsin, I was part of the UW, the University of Wisconsin Greens. So we did activism all the time, and my activist mentor, his parents were PhDs in biology, and so I met him in the early '90s, and he was working on his PhD at Madison, and then we did all sorts of activism. So the FBI, they started tailing us, and then because he did a FOIA request for our FBI files. I moved back to the Twin Cities, and I was doing activism there, and he told me they had over 900 pages of the FBI on on like 2 dozen activists, and then it was all redacted, and the FBI complained. They're like, we want you to rescind your FOIA request because it's too much work to redact all the 900 pages or whatever. I never saw any of this, but I'm just saying, like, if all we were doing was petition drives and protesting on the mall, we weren't doing any, like, of course they're afraid. They're afraid of like eco terrorists or whatever. And then I was investigated. I found out later I was included in a report of 12 top eco-terrorist suspects. The water temperature callus is the ocean. There's over 500 zettajoules of extra heat in the oceans. And if you go to Jim Massa's science talks. Um, I'll get the link for you. But he's the best. He lives in Alaska. He's an oceanographer PhD, and so he's really the best on because the oceans are what is driving abrupt global warming. And so you have since 1995, the oceans have been accumulating heat at an accelerating rate, and so now there's over 500 zettajoules of heat, which is the actual atmospheric warming so far since the Holocene 10,000 years ago has only been like 30 zettajoules. I get I get excited easily because I was an activist, so I'm used to like chanting. Do they consider the truth date? Oh yeah, of course. All right,
This article appeared in the
here's Jim NASA's science channel. I'm getting the link. My internet's slow right now because I don't know because I'm live streaming. But okay, here's the link. Okay, so basically, I figured out we were doomed by 1996. In the summer of 1996, I was working full time for Greenpeace. I was going door to door. I was fundraising for Greenpeace in the Twin Cities, and then my boss sent me out to Pine Ridge Reservation because the Dakota activist Anila Wakon, he wanted us out there at Greenpeace, and he sent me out there with another Greenpeace worker. And so Anila Wakon, he showed me this stream in on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is like one of the poorest places in the US. And he's like, well, that stream is polluted from uranium mining, you know. And of course, you can't tell, but this is what like. I mean, you got all these environmentalists now are like, oh, we need to have nuclear power. It's like they don't realize that the only reason you can have nuclear power is because you're relying on polluting the Native Americans. The indigenous people are the ones who've been, they most of the miners, the uranium miners, eh, have been Native American, and the mining's been done on Native American reservations, and then they're storing the waste on. They're trying to, it's like, you know, they like the first time I got arrested was because they were storing nuclear waste on the Mississippi River on a Native American reservation. So, and this was in Minnesota. I got arrested. It was 1994, and so that there was a big protest for that, and so the nuclear utility agreed that they would have a renewable energy requirement if they were allowed to store the nuclear waste. That was the deal that was made. And there was some other stuff that happened that I found out about later. Anyway, I ended up getting arrested 8 times doing activism. Um, I could go on and on about all the different times I was arrested, what it was for, what happened, but you get the picture. Like, there's some people that do activism. Um, like Winona LaDuke, that's what took her class at the University of Minnesota on environmental racism. And she lives in northern Minnesota on a reservation, and then she does environmental activism. That's her career. She ran for vice president with the Green Party with Ralph Nader, and then the Democratic Party freaked out about it because they're like, oh, they're gonna, they're, it's always like the corporate fascism kind of thing. It's like, I could go on and on about that, but the thing is like if you just focus on the science, all you have to do is focus on the science of the ecological crisis. So I studied conservation biology in Costa Rica for a semester in 1992 at the School for Field Studies, and that's when I read E.O. Wilson's textbook on biodiversity. And if you go to Guy McPherson's YouTube channel. He's a conservation biology professor, and he says that 1992 was the first year that it was published that we have a mass extinction of species crisis right now, what they're calling the sixth great mass extinction of species. And so I already knew that. I learned it right there in 1992, and I did research in Costa Rica. Yeah. Oh, really? At the Smithsonian? What's your collection? What what's your work in history? So you done history research, I take it, on Cuba or what? That's awesome. Hey, I'm honored to have your acquaintance. Hey, I body surfed in Costa Rica, which was an embarrassment for anybody who could witness it. Luckily, I couldn't witness it because I'm so blind without my glasses on. Oh, I meant body surf naked. That's what I meant. Oh, started free breakfast programs. Oh, so wait, what's your history collection at the Smithsonian? Anyway, yeah, okay. Let me post the Guy McPherson. Yeah. So for those for if you're new to this subject, take a little trip with me. If you're new to the subject, then you'll have to be initiated by Guy McPherson. Um, he has his own website. Hello. I'm talking about Eco Doom because the Arctic News, they have a let me repost this Arctic News. The They have a new blog post on Arctic News where they're saying it's been 70 degrees Fahrenheit ocean temperature, sea surface temperature in February in the Arctic, and it's like 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic in February. Oh, cool. That's awesome. Yeah. So the blog post is speculating. It's like, well, if it's actually 70, the ice extent is going down in February in the middle of the winter in the Arctic, which is it's supposed to be increasing. Obviously, everybody assumes, that the ice keeps getting thicker in the winter in the Arctic, but not this year. This year it's actually decreasing and it's 70 degrees. So they're saying like, look, this could easily become a blue ocean event. Like this could be it, which is ironic because we just had a oh sweet. That's very awesome. I worked with farmers from Mexico. They were like, we grew up eating organic food. And they didn't speak English because they didn't have time to learn English. And my boss, he was in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, so he was fluent in Spanish. So they had no reason to learn English for working for him. So then they had to suffer through my bad Spanish for 2 years. I got to speak like terrible Spanish, and they didn't complain that much about it. But and then I gave 2 months notice. I gave 2 months notice to leave, and then they all got really pissed because my boss is like, he finally admitted, like, on the last day, I kept telling him, "You gotta find a replacement." And the last day, he's like, "You're irreplaceable." Because I had a truck. I was hauling his fruit in a truck. Oh, nice. Yeah, that's cool. My sister's an ESL teacher in the public school. So um that's very impressive. So anyway, to get back to our imminent ecological doom, I was outside. I made a rare appearance outside in the neighborhood, and somebody asked me what I thought was going to happen with the farmers this summer, because I had my mushroom farm. I have a little CSA mushroom farm for growing shiitake in the forest. That's like what the IRS. That's what I filed to the IRS as my business employment, and so my neighbors, my community, they buy my mushrooms, and it's cool because then, like, it's a medicinal food. Yeah, it's medicinal food, so that they some of them cannot get enough of my mushrooms because they're like $20 a pound if you buy them at the co-op, because I grow them on the logs, so they're really powerful shiitake medicinal mushrooms. And anyway, normally they're grown indoors on the yeah. Okay. So I was just saying how Paul did a recent. He covered Natalia Shakova's latest paper um, on the methane increasing out of the out of the world's largest ocean shelf. Are you talking about something different? Like, is he talk? Because I try to keep up with Paul's. The thing about Paul's videos is that he's very much about empirical data, and he creates a lot of content where he's just reading all the data, but he doesn't prioritize the information. Occasionally, he'll give a summary, which is really nice, but most of the time, he's just like rambling all this empirical data, and then you get kind of lost in the weeds, But like I just kind of zone out usually because he's not really making any overall point to what he's talking about, which is fine. I mean, I understand like empirical data is that's a good thing. Um, but you can easily drown in empirical data. But the yeah, yeah, he's a good guy. I think um the like his fallout with Guy McPherson or whatever. I mean, I have to agree with Guy McPherson. Like, I think Guy McPherson is a conservation biologist, and he called it like it is. He called the McPherson paradox. That completely summarizes what he calls the predicament of our situation, where you have it was discovered the aerosol masking effect is twice as bad as previously thought, and this was the research of Daniel Rosenberg. So anybody can look up Daniel Rosenberg, and if you read the IPCC, yeah, tidiest bookshelf. Well, he's trying to get the Patreon. He's trying to make money off his website, his YouTube channel. So yeah, I know. I used to joke about tsunamis with my friends when we I like when we body surf in the ocean. I went to like Florida in high school, and we were like tsunami. Like, we thought it was funny, because we're from the middle of the continent, So, but it's like, no, that's that's like look at Fukushima. Tsunamis like a serious like the yeah. So okay, so this let me post this link again for anybody who's new. For anybody who might have missed it, I'm trying to get people to check out the latest Arctic News blog spot, where they're like, it's been 70 degrees Fahrenheit in February for the Arctic sea surface temperature, and they're like, because of El Nino, it's going to just keep getting warmer. It looks like the overall trend, and the sea ice extent is actually going down in the middle of the winter in the Arctic, and that's totally unheard of. Like, you just assume, in the Arctic, the ice is gonna, like, everybody, even the people who follow global warming, they're like, oh, the Arctic sea extent, it's still like 14,000 square kilometers or whatever. It's nowhere near the blue ocean event, which is supposed to be what, less than 1,000 square kilometers or something like that. I can't, maybe I'm saying it wrong, but the basic idea, it's but But when you if you like where I grew up in Minnesota, I grew up right next to a lake, so I could see like the day before the ice disappeared, the lake would be covered in the ice, and that's how it works. It's like the sea ice extent, it doesn't that's not the issue. The issue is the volume, right? Now, if you look at the volume, most of the Arctic ice is like 3 feet, 3 feet or less. Now, 3 feet of ice is really not that much ice. It can melt really fast. Yeah, right. The multi-year ice, the ancient ice is right. And so, oh, right. Yeah, I know. I could not live in California. I have my aunt moved there, and then I have a cousin who still lives there, and I I don't know, just like I I don't know. I really like where I live because it's like we have tornadoes. Tornadoes are really scary, but my parents, they were the year they got married, there was this tornado that like killed a bunch of people where my mom was teaching the school, she had some of her class students, I think they had like they knew people that got killed, something like that. Anyway, but my parents were luckily like in a movie theater when the tornadoes came through, that kind of thing. Like I happen to live right next to a big hill and then a river. I'm in a river valley, so I'm pretty much protected from tornadoes where I live. So that's like the worst thing that could happen, and I happen to be protected. Yeah, the I know. It's like I volunteer to mow the lawns where I live. I have like an acre of lawns for like 20 houses, and I barely had to mow last year because the drought. I've been mowing here for 3 years, and every year the drought keeps getting worse and worse. No, I don't have a room for rent. I do not have. I barely have my own room. You've seen my room. Um. Okay, so yeah, I have my. I'm. I think I'm not really a survivalist. I totally think like okay, it's very likely that we're gonna have a food crisis. I think it could very like like when you have the physics.org coming out and saying that farmers with 1 degree Celsius increase, the farmers lose 60% of their net income. That's the latest Guy McPherson video. Oh yeah, the atmospheric river. I know. I think everybody's a survivalist when push comes to shove. Like I met some people from Somalia, and they're like, "Yeah, we had to walk a week with no food and I think probably like next to no water to get to the UN camp." The farmer protests in Europe. Well, I don't see. I don't. I don't really blame the farmers because it's like farmers are literally the hardest working people on the planet and the least paid. And they're like the problem with farming is it's all controlled by distribution. I did an expose on Cargill. Cargill is based in Minnesota. Cargill is the world's largest private corporation, and it's controlled by yeah, but Cargill is controlled by like a family of like 70 people, but there's like 20 billionaires in the Cargill private ownership, and they operate in like 120 countries at the same time. I mean, Cargill is critical to the U.S. empire, and I did this expose on them when I was at the university. I was actually hired by the university newspaper to write op-eds because I have every camping gear, tent, truck full of gas. Wow, 26-year pantry? That's a lot of food. I buy like dried I get organic lentils and organic white rice and I get like the 25-pound bags. I think I have a stash of that in a bear proof. Am I revealing too much information? I'm not being a real survivalist. You're supposed to like stay secret and have a weapon or something, but to kill off the zombies. But seriously, like, okay, okay, so like if you turn on the TV you're gonna watch a child rapist. Like there's a serial child rapist who's on the person on TV the most. He has 14 phone contacts in Jeffrey Epstein's black book. And the news can't even say this. The news cannot report that. Like it was a Business Insider article. And the lady who wrote the article, she was a graduate of Columbia Journalism School, which is like the top journalism school in the world or something. I don't know. And nobody, like even the people who wrote expose books on Jeffrey Epstein, Whitney Webb and Nick Bryant. I talked to Nick Bryant because he was the one who got the black book published of Jeffrey Epstein originally. And even he would get interviewed on YouTube, and they would even ask him, they would ask him like a leading question, like, if you're at a party with Epstein and he puts your arms around you, that doesn't mean you're really bad, does it? And he would literally not say that they were talking about the person who's on the TV the most. Like if you're in prison and you're a child rapist, that's the lowest scum evil in prison. And yet he's on this creature is on the TV more than anybody else, and the news refuses to point out that he's a credibly alleged child rapist because he has 14 phone contacts. And also, like if you watch that Netflix documentary on Maxine, what's her name? She like Mar-a-Lago was the number one source for victims for Epstein when he was in Florida. And then if you look at the phone contacts, I mean, so it's very obvious. Yeah, Gizwell, anybody could, it could so easily be investigated. Like, why isn't this creature on TV, who's on TV more than anybody else? Like, he loves bad news, whether it's bad news or good news. He just wants to be in the news, right? And they cannot even mention, like, even on YouTube, like supposed independent investigators, of YouTube, like Nick Bryant and Whitney Webb, they've written, I've even talked to the publisher of Whitney Webb, like he was going to publish a book by me. His name's Chris Milligan of Trine, and I've emailed him several times, like, how come Whitney Webb will not even, she won't even mention that Trump has 14 phone contacts in Jeffrey Epstein's black book, which makes Trump a credibly alleged child rapist. And it's like, why can't the news, we're supposed to be in this high technology, high info. Yeah, I know. It's like, in other words, we live in a completely insane world where the most evil scum in prison is the most well-known person on TV. And so what do you expect? Like, why wouldn't we be facing imminent ecological catastrophe? Why wouldn't the Arctic about to melt, and nobody even knows about it? Like, well, yeah, sure, they'll talk about Clinton, but the Clintons aren't running for president. You know, Trump is running for president, and Hitler, he read Hitler's ex speeches. His Hitler speeches was Trump's bedtime reading, and he's doing the same tactic that Hitler did, where he's saying, if I lose the election, I won't consider it valid, and there will be a civil war. And that's precisely what Hitler did to establish Nazism. Is he told the corporate leaders to get funded. He said that it doesn't matter if I lose the election, because if I lose, there'll be a civil war, and I'm not gonna. He's using the exact same tactics that Hitler used. And so they will do, no matter what it takes. They will not talk about Trump. They'll talk about Clinton, Clinton, Clinton. Yeah, I know Clinton's evil. I protested the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1996. I had a cop come up to me and say, "We'll smash your skulls just like we did in '68." I saw the helicopters. I saw a battalion of cops in formation, waiting, standing like an army. I've been through it. I protested the Democrats more than enough. I personally confronted Vice President Al Gore in the basement of the VFW in Minneapolis. I confronted him for a half an hour face to face. I was with a dozen other activists. His CIA, his Secret Service were there. I told him, I said, everybody knows the CIA is complicit in the drug trade. And then right when I said that, his Secret Service goes, "Come on, Al, let's go." He got into his helicopter. He flew away. When he was leaving the room, I yelled across the room, "The blood of the Uwa is on your conscience," because the Uwa were why we were there. They're an indigenous tribe in Colombia in the rainforest. and their land was being invaded by Al Gore's family fortune, his Occidental Oil Company. So I have no problem saying the Democrats are corrupt. I have personally confronted the Democrats, the whole Democratic machine. I got pulled over by the cop on the way home because the mayor of Minneapolis was there, and it's all it's all Democratic run. So the cop just said, "Can I get your license?" He never said why he pulled me over, and I never asked him. He just wanted to get my information, put me on whatever watch list or whatever. So that's just one activist story. I have tons of them. Bill asked Don to run. So did Oprah. Oprah on TV said, "Why aren't you gonna? Are you gonna run for president, Donald?" So yeah, the whole the but the thing is like, okay, I understand the Clintons are corrupt. I understand Clinton's part of the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing. But the fact is that Trump is the one running for president. Trump's the one saying he's gonna he's gonna do another insurrection. That's exactly what Hitler said. Like Noam Chomsky has said, Trump is actually more dangerous than Hitler because global warming is about to destroy the whole planet. Global warming, we're facing biological annihilation. Like you can look up Google Scholar, go into Google Scholar and type biological annihilation, annihilation, and you get lots of peer-reviewed studies on how we are facing imminent biological annihilation. And now, well, yeah, we refuse to cooperate. Like, I mean, you can't take blood from a rock, right? Like if they're not, like the Nazis, the whole point of the Nazis was they're like, we're not even gonna have slavery. We're not gonna keep people alive. We are gonna work them as fast as possible and then exterminate them. We're gonna have like I've been studying the Nazis because that's what we're facing. Like it's more, the Nazis, the economic policy of the Nazis was just to burn through people, to work them as fast as possible. They killed people so fast that they realized, wait a second, we need a workforce. We better start not killing them so fast. So then they're like, okay, we'll feed them just enough to keep them working for a month and let them live for like a month. Like, and they lose like 10 pounds a week doing forced labor, but then and then they're killed off, and those are the lucky ones. I mean, that's we're in other words, like that was what, I don't know, 60 years ago or something, right? So in other words, what we're facing next, it's like there's okay, if you have 40 million people in a food emergency this summer in the Horn of Africa. I mean, that makes, that's equivalent of World War II right there. But you're having it, I mean, like just in the US, from the pandemic, more people were killed by the pandemic than in World War II in the from the US, from people from the US. And that's not even acknowledged. I mean, World War II, that's a big deal. If you were from, the generation World War II, they still, they think that World War II is a big deal, but they won't even. Of course, the elderly. It was mostly the elderly that were killed off by the pandemic. So they, you know, they're going to be the ones that would remember World War II anyway. Like if you're 85, you were a child during World War II. So most people they're not alive anymore. But anyway, yeah, refusing to cooperate. I mean, I got arrested 8 times. I worked as little as possible. I rode a bicycle and I ate out of dumpsters for 10 years. For 10 years, I literally ate out of dumpsters and I rode a 3-speed bicycle. So if you call that not cooperating, I only worked like 12 hours a week. I rented a room. The cops thought I was homeless, of course, but I rented the cheapest room I could find. I read one scholarly book a day for 10 years. Destruction of all is a fascist inevitability. So we've got the Arctic slushy getting less chunky. Yeah. Okay. That reminds me, like when I lived in Alaska, my boss, who was, we were completely dependent on him. He decided he wanted to make the earliest crossing of the Talkeetna River, and you can look up the Talkeetna River. It's on the way to Denali, And so we were sliding across that river on our bellies in I don't know when it was, but all I know is the next week a fur trapper went missing and my boss found him frozen. He had fallen into the Talkeetna River and he found him frozen to death next to the Talkeetna River. So we crossed the river a week earlier than somebody who froze to death. So yeah, this year in Minnesota, we've had more rescues of people who have tried to go out on the ice because people are in complete denial. They're used to ice fishing. Like a lot of people here, they have to go ice fishing every winter. So they go out and they drive on like 2 inches of ice or something insane, and then they have to get rescued. They're on like some ice float or they're in the water or whatever. And so the denial is obviously the denial is like a real thing. I mean, you can't argue with denial. And so Mother Nature's in control. It's like, well, we we can look at what Mother Nature's doing and we can try to prepare for it. But for those who are new, I've just been discussing this new Arctic News blog post. Um, that it's been 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic in the middle of the winter. In February, the sea surface temperature has been 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The sea ice extent has been going down in the middle of the winter in the Arctic, which is completely unheard of. And so this latest blog post is saying, look, we are looking at the blue ocean event. And this is what Guy McPherson predicted. He said 2026, he's like, everything's going to keep accelerating. And all the time, constantly on YouTube, everybody's like, Guy McPherson, like there was a guy, we watched this Doom. There was just an interview of Elliot Jacobson by this guy, Dan Miller or something like that. And he's got some global warming, I think he calls it like global warming chat or something like that. And he just kept ranting against Guy McPherson. He's like, Guy McPherson has always been wrong. He's never been right. And it's like, and I just typed in the live stream chat. I'm like, yeah, because once doom happens, it's like if the forest gets wipes out, there's no trees to be heard falling. The whole metaphor, like if like I mean, if biological annihilation happens, once it happens, then you can't say, oh, I was right, I predicted it correctly. I mean, like people don't understand the exponential rate of change means that the acceleration keeps accelerating. It's what Jim Massa, he calls it the torque. The torque is what they call the third differential in calculus. Not that I agree with standard science. Well, that's what they're saying. He's like, hey, he gets some dates wrong. But the thing is he's been saying 2026 for the collapse of civilization. He's not saying like all life on Earth is going to be gone. But the point is that if you look at the rate of acceleration is accelerating. As Jim Massa says, it's exponentiating. And so if we're having 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of the winter in the Arctic, and the ice extent is going down, and it's going to keep getting warmer and warmer this year in the Arctic. And because of the ocean temperature, once the Arctic ice is gone, then we have a huge tipping point, and then we have the East Siberian Arctic Shelf has 1,200 gigatons of pressurized methane. Now that can Natalia Shakova has been saying for the past 10 years that we could easily have a 50 gigaton abrupt eruption at any moment. And this was published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Science in 2021 by Julia Steinbach, and whoever else, peer-reviewed top science journal. And she's saying that abrupt eruption is very probable in the world's largest ocean shelf of this pressurized methane. And so it's completely standard science now that abrupt eruption of methane is, and not only is it very probable, but the latest paper by Natalia Shakova has documented that the methane keeps accelerating out of the Arctic, and the ocean floor of the Arctic is warming faster than the ice on the permafrost surface. And so the Arctic News blog has already posted that the ocean tipping point, the methane floor tipping point is 1.3 degrees Celsius anomaly increase. Now we've already reached 1.5 degrees Celsius anomaly for the atmosphere, but and we know that the ocean water is warming at a faster rate than the atmosphere, which means they're saying that the methane Arctic tipping point will definitely be breached this this spring, like this year. And so maybe it won't happen. Hopefully it won't happen. Guy McPherson, he keeps saying, "Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. That would be great. I want somebody to disprove me." But this is what the evidence is saying. And I don't look to scientists for the answer. That's why I do my qigong class every day because I consider qigong to be the answer. And the science of qigong is called non-commutativity. And all of science does not know about non-commutativity. All pretty much like 99.9% of modern science is based on commutative geometry. Hello. Yeah, Jim Massa, he does a really great job. I consider him to be the best doomer scientist posting on YouTube. But he cites Guy McPherson all the time too. And the other thing that Jim Massa does is he's completely against geoengineering. And I've corresponded with Raymond Pierre Humbert, who's the top expert on the quantum origins of global warming. And he was a geophysicist at University of Chicago, and now he's at Oxford University. And I have his book called the global warming. I don't know. It's called like the global warming book or something. It's a compilation of all the top global warming science papers, and it includes Joseph Fourier's the very first global warming paper was by Joseph Fourier, who's one of the top scientists ever known. And it was published 200 years ago. And the paper literally says, and I quote, there's going to be an increase of, quote, dark heat. And that's infrared radiation. He called it dark heat. And he said that this increase is due to the, quote, effects of human industry. And so 200 years ago, he already knew that the whole earth was going to heat up due to the, quote, effects of human industry. And the heat would be from, quote, dark heat, which is later called infrared radiation. So global warming was proven already in published science 200 years ago. And so it's hilarious that, like, there's still this debate, because obviously all these grown adults, they have to support their American dream lifestyle where they got to go on vacation and raise a family and pay their mortgage. And so they have to debate global warming, even though it was proven 200 years ago. They have to have something to talk about and discuss and debate. And are you familiar with Stefan Burns' reports on Schumann resonance? I've studied the Schumann resonance. The Andrija Puharich, he was a military scientist, and he was the biggest promoter of the Schumann resonance. In fact, I personally got arrested climbing the Navy's Project Elf Schumann resonance nuclear submarine communication system in Wisconsin. It was hooked up with Michigan. I was personally arrested there climbing the fence while I was singing John Lennon's song "Give Peace a Chance." This was in 1995. I received the arrest warrant in the mail 10 years later because I did not pay the fine. So I paid the fine 10 years later so I could keep working at my environmental nonprofit activist job. I had to post a sign at my job to plead with my manager to give me some of my vacation pay so I could pay my fine so I could keep working in my supposed activist job. They didn't do much activism because they themselves were fined by the IRS for supposed misuse of their education funds for activism when they were protesting against nuclear waste being stored on the Mississippi River in 1994. So, yeah, I know about the Schumann resonance. I can assure you that if you email Professor Raymond Pierre Humbert or read his papers are you can read them for free on Physics Today. He wrote a 2011 It was published on Planetary Climate. He's the world's top expert on the quantum origins of abrupt global warming. And he points out that our current carbon emissions rate is 200 times the rate of the natural carbon cycle on Earth. So the natural carbon cycle is 12 gigatons per 200 years. We are currently emitting anywhere between 1,000 gigatons, which is our by far the best projection, or 5,000 gigatons in 200 years, compared to the natural cycle of 12 gigatons of CO2. Now that CO2 is all based on quantum frequency. So if you read the follow-up article in Physics Today, it was published in 2022 on the thermodynamics of global warming. It's all due to photon radiation based on photon frequency. So if you want to really understand global warming, you have to study quantum frequency and understand that that's why the ocean has over 500 zettajoules of extra heat stored up since 1995. I think it's like 200 Hiroshima equivalent heat. The bombs of Hiroshima. I think it's 200 bombs like a minute or something insane like that. Hemp is not good enough. If we had okay, we could do algae. If you look at algae, okay, oil is from algae. If you go into Google Scholar and just search algae carbon sequestration, there was a 2023 peer-reviewed study that says 100 algae can store 100 gigatons of CO2 per year, microalgae. Now, oil is from algae. I was saying this in 2004 on Gorilla News Network, which was Anthony LePay's website, and Anthony LePay works for Vice News now. I emailed him about this. I'm like, look, Exxon just pulled their funding for algae because Exxon can't make a profit to turn algae into fuel. But the issue is not fuel, the issue is ecology. Oil is from algae. There's a guy with 2 PhDs in marine biology. He's set up a company called Brilliant Planet. His name is Raphael Jovine. He says at best he can store 10 gigatons, that's 10 billion tons of CO2 per year, with near ocean algae farms, and they just sequester the algae into the desert. They mummify it. But he's saying that that's at best for him, based on all the open space of the deserts near the ocean. And he's currently has a pilot project in Morocco. He's storing like 100,000 tons a year of algae. All he needs is more funding. He's already got all the land planned out to expand into on all the deserts along the oceans. Now, all it needs is priority and funding. All you need is people to focus on ecology and to realize that all of our oil comes from algae originally. Algae, yes, the virtual photons. Photosynthesis is proven to be uh, quantum entanglement. The most efficient photon energy conversion is through photosynthesis. Algae's been on the planet for 4.6 billion years. I eat algae every day. Algae on land. You have to have algae on land. We need algae farms everywhere. All we have to do is grow algae. We can literally save the planet through algae. That's it. It's very, very, very simple. Why doesn't it happen? Because almost everybody now grows up in the city. I grew up in the city. I happen to spend every day next to a lake staring at the wildlife. So I happen to be, yeah, work on an algae farm. You can grow spirulina. You can eat it. I eat spirulina every day. It's pretty much, it has all the essential amino acids. It's got all these minerals, and it's got all sorts of healing properties. It purifies your blood, because the only difference between your blood and hemoglobin and chlorophyll is the magnesium and iron or element, in the middle of the molecule. Anyway, people have eaten spirulina for eons. We could. All we need is funding and prioritization. You won't find anybody talking about algae. Why? Because everybody's so fixated on technology because they grow up in cities. They don't study ecology. Yeah, green sludge, green scum. Okay, so we could literally solve global warming if all we need to do is focus on ecology. And the oldest life on Earth is algae, and all of our oil comes from algae. So I was saying this in 2004, 20 years ago. when I first started posting online. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I tasted that stuff I got from China, and it tastes exactly the same as the now organic spirulina. So I assure you that the stuff I ordered for half the price from China, it's what they get. Now gets their stuff from the same 2 pound source that I got in China. Um, so like even Guy McPherson, he's a conservation biologist. He's not talking about algae. Why? Why? Because I don't know. Like we're cut off. We're what do they call it? Speciesism. Like algae is a bacteria. It's cyanobacteria. It's not even plant. It's the oldest life form on Earth. Who's Maria? Oh, marijuana. Is that- yeah. Well, okay. The point being that since algae is actually a cyanobacteria, it will sequester carbon at 50 times the rate of any plants. You get it? We're talking about 4.6 billion years ago. Like you can't even compare it with plants. Like that's what I'm trying to say. I'm like, forget plants, forget, fungi. If you want to talk about land organisms, fungi actually stores carbon the best of any land organism. Aerosol masking, sure, that's another big thing. Like people, like even James Hansen. James E. Hansen is closer to Guy McPherson's science than anybody else, and James E. Hansen's the most credible global warming scientist on the planet. He was the first one to talk to Congress about it. And what was it, 1988 or whatever, 87? And so, um, he's now saying that the fastest rate of warming in the atmosphere is due to the aerosol masking effect. In other words, when we stopped having the sulfur in the diesel fuel for the cargo ships in the North Atlantic, then they could document that the surface temperature of the North Atlantic just dramatically increased. And so you can extrapolate that data now to prove that indeed when we switch to renewable energy, it's just going to heat up the planet even faster because a 40%. I double checked all the sources that Guy McPherson relied on, and I calculated it myself. A 40% decrease in coal burning will heat up Earth another 1 degree Celsius global average. Actually, Guy misquoted the study because you have to really read the study. There's two different types of aerosol masking. Yeah, James E. Hansen, he even got arrested. I mean, come on. How many scientists go and get arrested anymore? Like I used to debate this with my friends when I lived in a commune. I lived in a commune with 35 people, and my friends, we were all taking ornithology together. And I'm like, look, we have enough scientists. We need to focus on policy change. This was in 1992 or 1993, and I was like, we need policy change. We have enough science. We have to do activism. And they got mad at me. Why? Because you're paying for university. University is expensive. Most people who go to university, they need to find a good paying job. They need the American dream. They want to get married. They want to, probably have kids, go on vacation. They're not gonna they're not gonna throw all that away. How are they gonna pay for their school money? Their school, you know, my I had my parents paid for my schooling. I worked like 5 jobs at one time, when I was at the university. I still worked, but I didn't have, like, debt. I did not have school debt, so I did activism. I focused on activism. I would just say that once. I didn't, like, harp it on them. I didn't harp about it, but my point being that you can see where I was doing that in 1992, 1993, and by 1996, I realized we were completely doomed. I remember the specific moment when I knew we were doomed. I was at my activist mentor's house, his parents' house. His parents got the Audubon Award because they saved an endangered species in Minnesota. They stopped a golf course. They're both biology PhDs. They were in Berkeley in the 1960s. They were part of the civil rights movement. One of their roommates was from Zimbabwe when they went to UC Berkeley. They took their family to Zimbabwe. My activist mentor, he did his PhD on indigenous Shona farming in Zimbabwe at Madison. of course, the Madison Land Resources Department, they did not want to, accept this as a PhD, like indigenous non-Western farming. And so anyway, I was at their farm in 1996. His mom, she had ran a wildlife rehabilitation center because she had a PhD in biology, and his dad was a professor at the St. Cloud State University, and he would take his class every year to um, study the wolves out in Lake Superior, the wolves living on the island, and so Isle Royale. And so anyway, I remember the specific moment. By that time, I had already been arrested several times. I'd been protesting in DC, New York. You know, I studied. Also, read. I studied. I already had my undergraduate degree with a new focus on sustainability. I did my undergraduate degree. One third of it was in biology, one third of it was in economics, one third of it was in political science, and I was supposed to integrate all three disciplines as sustainability. I had one of the very first degrees in sustainability. It was a new option in the international relations degree at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I discovered firsthand that these three disciplines all lied about each other. I wrote I finished my degree. I compiled it as a book. I called it The New Academy. And this was like the New Academy, Education for Sustainability. My activist friend, he put it into the Historical Society at Madison in Wisconsin. So I don't even have those papers anymore. But if I went to Madison and I looked up the Historical Society, I could find my papers I wrote as an undergraduate. My environmental economics paper was called "The Incorrect Supply and Demand Model," and my environmental economics instructors, they were all promoting the free market as the solution to the ecological crisis. And my teacher said, "You need to change your subject." And of course, I refused to do that. I doubled down. I found more sources to back up my argument. Turned my paper in. I got a B on the paper. He passed the paper around to his instructor colleagues in his office. They're all like PhD students. They covered the paper in red marks because I didn't have enough commas. So like wherever I could have a comma, they put a big red circle. Then the only written comment on the paper at the very end, it said, "I still think economists are smarter than you think they are." That's it. What You're all quite a bit smarter than me. I'm concerned with the state of the world. I'm just too selfish and focused on myself. We're all just trying to survive. Most people are completely stuck where they're in debt. They're in debt. They have to work 9 to 5. They got to pay their car payments. They got to pay their mortgage. I ate out of dumpsters for 10 years. I literally ate out of dumpsters. You know, well, I'm eccentric. I focused on. I read one book a day. I had a guy say, "Oh, you must have come from a wealthy family so you could get educated." I'm like, "Look, you don't. Anybody could get educated if they want to." I read one scholarly book a day from libraries. I went to all the libraries in the Twin Cities, the public libraries, the university libraries. I went to used bookstores. I bought the used books and I'd resell them. I read the books in the libraries. I read the books in fast food restaurants. I read the books in coffee houses. I knew we were doomed when Reagan. Yeah, Reagan, exactly. Yeah, I know. Right, right. No, I kept after I got my master's degree, I went to work at the environmental nonprofit Clean Water Action. I worked there for 10 years and I worked the minimum amount of hours so I could pay my rent. And I had people were freaking out. They're like, there was one guy there, he was in the Republican Party or whatever. And he's like, "Are you moonlighting?" Because we were friends because we had the same background. He couldn't understand. I ate a bulb of garlic a day for luckily I worked alone. Like I ate organic garlic so I could eat all the junk food in the dumpsters, like whether it was one time I ate from leftovers from a restaurant. I did not like half-eaten food and stuff. I use tea tree oil too because tea tree oil you're not supposed to consume tea tree oil, but why the indigenous people of Australia, they called it a tea for a reason because they James Cook expedition, they drank it. They drank the tea trail. That's why it was a tea. Western medicine says it's poison. You're not supposed to drink it. Well, I that's what I use. I use it, you know, because it's effective antiseptic. You know, yeah. I'm just saying this is what I did personally, just to try to focus on education, and that's how I discovered something called non-commutativity in science, which is like all of science is based on commutative geometry, which is essentially the exponential function. I still didn't trust anybody who was of voting age then. Yeah, I know. My skin turned literally permanently yellow from all the sulfur in the garlic, which is pretty funny. One time I stepped on a public bus and I almost like cleared the whole bus. Like that's how, that's how much garlic I ate. Um, okay. Yeah. Well, right. The whole Reagan fascist thing. I mean, I spent 2 years just reading Noam Chomsky books because I had I know. I had a close friend of mine from high school. He told me to read Noam Chomsky. Yeah, I discovered that the special forces in the military, they get injected with hydrogen sulfide, which is what you know, garlic is full of hydrogen sulfide apparently. But they literally get injected with hydrogen sulfide because it doubles your endurance. And I was biking 10 miles a day, like all year long, which on an old 3 speed, which is really heavy bike. So like I would see these guys with their fancy, $2,000 bikes. I'm like, if I had one of those, carbon bikes, I could just fly because I'm just riding this tank, like in the winter, and cruising along. I would go faster than the buses or whatever. And it was fun. I mean, I was young and healthy through my 30s pretty much. Anyway, so when we look at what we're facing now, the if we knew, like, okay, global warming, it was on the news in the 1980s. Um, it's just getting worse and accelerating. Jim Massa said 1995 was the big tipping point because every year after 1995, the oceans have accumulated heat. Yeah, I don't know about Superman, but um, The I knew we were doomed by 1996, which is precisely the tipping point that Jim Massa um, identified was 1995. He says the oceans are what is driving global warming. Well, okay, yeah, if we focused on growing algae, we could we because what we have to do is we have to sequester carbon. Obviously, we're in deep denial about the economy. Like as Guy McPherson points out, even like he used to think like, well, we need to shut down civilization, but but because of the aerosol masking effect, if we did that, it would just trigger the natural tipping points of the methane in the Arctic and the permafrost carbon, and then we'd have um, if we have the food supply collapse, which could happen this summer, we don't know, but it could very likely happen this summer. Then we're looking at the nuclear power plants melting down because if you have no food, then it's very likely that the nuclear power plants aren't going to be maintained. And they're already in crisis because they can't find enough water that's cool enough to cool like in France, it's like meanwhile, they're pushing nuclear power as like the key, essential, crucial way to save the planet. So it's completely like the denial just keeps getting worse and worse. Can't the supernatural abilities developed through cultivation be used to refresh nature? It's a good question. The Well, this is what I'm trying to do. Like algae, like if you just use algae, like we can grow algae. You know what I mean? Like why? Like let nature do the work for us. And algae's been around on the planet for 4.6 billion years. Oil is from algae, so it just makes sense if we grow algae. Like it's very very simple. Dr. Love is does he do who's Dr. Love? Does There's a Dr. Love who does there's a Love somebody who goes by Love, but he's like a qigong teacher or something. But um, we okay, we want some kind of external technology. We think, oh, there's got to be some kind of external technology. But algae's okay. Our body's energy is from mitochondria. So if you're talking about supernatural abilities, mitochondria is algae. It's called symbiosis. The mitochondria used to be algae. It used to be. This was first proven by Lynn Margulis, and she was married to Carl Sagan for a while. She's a biology professor. So they've proven now that the mitochondria in our cells, every cell in our body has to have algae in it to power it. I mean, it's called mitochondria, but it originates from algae. I'm all ears. You can type whatever you want about Dr. Love with water. Um, I'm sure it's not a joke, but I don't know what it is at all. So go ahead and share what you want. I've never heard of it. So um so the question is like, why don't people want to talk about algae? It's too simple. They're too they're too disconnected from it. Like we live in this high tech culture, right? So who wants to talk about algae? It's too like most people, if they care about life, they care about dogs or pets or maybe like farm animals. They want to protect farm animals or something like that. Like, why would they think algae is the most important species on the planet? To save the planet, they want. Maybe they'll talk about hemp or trees, planting trees. I used to donate to trees.org, the Trees for the Future. It's a great nonprofit. They plant forest farms in the equator. They train people who live along the equator to grow forest farms. Hey, I love it. It's great, but it's not algae. Like algae can sequester carbon 50 times faster than any plant on the planet. And so all we need, it's very, very simple. That's precisely why nobody's talking about it, because it's too simple. Photosynthesis works through quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement, they're trying to make synthetic photosynthesis. They're trying to say, how can we make technology that mimics photosynthesis? Because we can get a near 100% conversion of energy if we can achieve synthetic photosynthesis. You don't need synthetic photosynthesis. They're like, well, okay, if we grow algae, we need to genetically engineer it so we can turn it into fuel. No, we need to be able to grow food by not having the climate too hot. So we just need to grow algae. We don't need to turn it into fuel. We just need the algae to sequester the carbon so we can keep the planet down. Oh, yeah, Dr. Emoto. I know about Dr. Emoto. Okay. Yeah, I looked into his research. There's a Professor Rustum Roy. If you look up Professor Rustum Roy, he did a cool analysis of Emoto. Rustum Roy actually held an academic conference on Bigu. Bigu is the Taoist ability to live without food and very little water and not lose any nutrition. Now, how do they do that? That's through basically photosynthesis. They're doing quantum entanglement. I've done tons of videos about it. I've done lots of research on it. But this video I'm focused on the ecological crisis. And I have no problem being called a doomer. I was a doomer since 1996, like I said. But that doesn't stop me from thinking that there is a solution, and I think the solution is algae because um, everybody, they want some kind of technological solution, and they say, well, we need to cool the planet. No, the cause of the problem is CO2 emissions. So then they say, well, we need to capture CO2. We have to build some kind of high tech technology to capture CO2. And then some people are like, no, we can use trees. Trees are natural CO2. No, actually, it's algae. Oil comes from algae. Algae sequesters CO2 at 50 times the rate of trees. And so Why hasn't anybody been talking about algae? Well, it's just like any other, secret technology that works. What happens? Big oil, they decided to take over algae. They're like, no, we'll fund algae, all the algae research, and then Exxon suddenly just dropped all their funding for algae. Why? Because they couldn't turn it into fuel. They're in other words, they're trying to control the algae research because just like any of their free energy, quote unquote technology, they want to suppress it and control it, patent it, genetically engineer it. I've exposed genetic engineering research. I personally exposed Monsanto controlling the University of Minnesota research in 1999. I personally confronted, the president of the University of Minnesota about Monsanto. The chair the chair of the biology department at the University of Minnesota, Phil Regal. You can look him up. He moved back to Canada, and he told me personally, he's like, "Yeah, Monsanto took over our biology department." He was very glad. Hey, Sandy. Yeah, so I'm just promoting algae, Sandy. Discussing the brand new I'm discussing the brand new Arctic News blog post that says it's been 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of the winter. The sea surface temperature has been 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The Arctic ice extent is going down. Oh yeah, Raphael Jovin. Raphael Jovin of Brilliant Planet. He's got lots of interviews on YouTube. And would like you to do is, because he says 10 billion gigatons is by far the most he can sequester a year for carbon with his algae farms. But the thing is I just want him to admit that, can we build more algae farms farther inland? Could we potentially, because the peer reviewed research says in 2023, it says that we can store 100 gigatons a year we can sequester with algae, microalgae. Now, so this guy's the top world's expert in algae carbon sequestration. So if anybody's going to lead the effort to ramp up the funding and priority on algae, it's going to be Raphael Jovin. We just need him to get on the record admitting, if we had more funding from all the billionaires, and we're soon we're going to have trillionaires. I will admit right now, I was contacted by somebody who told me they were obscenely wealthy, and they donated money to me for 2 years. The research I've done for the past 2 years, I did because somebody donated money to me. And it wasn't a lot of money because I didn't request a lot of money. And I would have done meditation. I would have loved to have just meditated the whole time, but they don't believe in meditation. They want to see research. They want to see like physical evidence. They want to see experiments, So my point is that, obviously, like Ralph Nader has said the same thing. He's like, it's the billionaires who are going to save the planet because they're we we have the U.S. has the worst wealth, inequality of any industrialized country in the world, and we also have the biggest empire on the planet, military empire. And so obviously, you if you want to have algae funded, you're going to have, you're going to like these billionaires could easily do it if they wanted to, but it yeah, I know. Obviously, the reason they're billionaires is because they're brainwashed. Um, so at any rate, the so yeah, this is why algae hasn't been funded. When I posted in 2004, 20 years ago on Gorilla News Network, I said the future of life on Earth is going to be algae, one way or another. So I would like to hear next time you have Jim Massa on your show, Sandy. Please ask him if he thinks algae can survive in the oceans even after the blue ocean event, even after, well, yeah, Taylor Swift's kind of busy these days. All right. Yeah, you heard me. So I I asked Jim Massa questions on his channel, but he's busy doing his research. He doesn't really reply to my comments on his channel. Um, but my point is like if algae has a chance to survive in the oceans, at least life can start again on the Earth. It might take 10 millions of years for complex so-called complex life. But what's more complex than photosynthesis? It's quantum entanglement. It's the most efficient energy transfer in the world that they know of. They're trying to recreate it artificially as technology, blah, blah, blah. But that's what life already, we already rely on quantum entanglement. It's in quantum biology. I could talk about quantum biology as much as anybody else. I mean, I've read the guy Jim Kahali. He was a co-author of the only quantum biology book called Life on the Edge. If you want an overview of quantum biology as a new discipline, he co-authored the book with Professor John Joe McFadden. The book was published in 2016. It won the Royal Society. Um, what's it called? The Royal Society of London. That Newton used to be in charge of or whatever. It won their Science Book of the Year award in 2016. Um, Jim Jim Al Kahali, he's totally against any kind of like paranormal, non-Western, shamanic energy kind of thing. He's like, oh, that's just from the hippies. They did too much LSD. He's like, so I mean, he hasn't. He's the so-called expert in quantum biology, but even he doesn't understand quantum biology. You have to read Professor Basil J. Hiley, who was the collaborator with David Bohm on the quantum potential. And I took quantum physics from a top quantum physics scientist who designed the NASA quantum teleportation satellite system, Herbert J. Bernstein. He got hired by the NSA, and his research was, made top secret without him even knowing it was declared top secret. He so I've studied. I did research the past 2 years studying quantum physics, and the whole secret of quantum biology is what they call non-commutativity. And Basil J. Hiley, he explains that if you have non-commutativity, then the quantum entanglement, the quantum coherence does not collapse. It does not have to collapse at the macro scale. Yeah, I've done that. I've been invited on other shows where they've had like high level physics and they're discussing it. And I'm there asking questions, and it's hilarious because I literally only took one physics class my whole life, but my quantum physics professor, his emphasis was like everybody should take quantum physics as their very first physics class because quantum physics is the foundation of reality now as far as science is concerned. And the problem is people take classical physics when they're in high school, and so they learn the wrong foundation of reality, and so they're brainwashed for the rest of their life. And even the Pythagorean theorem is disproven by the truth of reality as non-commutativity. So, but yet, according to standard science, the Pythagorean theorem is the most well-proven mathematical, formula on the planet. But it's like, okay, so standard science, it's they'll tell you math works. Okay, well, if math works, then why are we about to experience biological annihilation on Earth? If science is so great, then how come we have this ecological crisis? I mean, almost every physicist does not discuss the ecological crisis. They ignore it. And even Sabine Hassenfelder, she's the only one who has a physics channel that gets like a big viewing on YouTube. And even she posted a video just a few months ago saying, I was wrong about global warming. I misunderstood global warming. And if you watch that video, she cites Professor Raymond Pierre Humbert. I emailed Professor Raymond Pierre Humbert. I said, hey, Sabine Hassenfelder, she's citing your work. That's great. He's like, yeah, she had to email me to clarify my research in order to make that video. And I said, okay, that's great. But why are physicists making their careers on YouTube or whatever, however they make their careers? I mean, 50% of physics is military funded, right? And they're supposed experts in physics, and yet they're ignoring the greatest crisis of modern science on the planet, they're completely ignoring it. Like, she's the only one who talks about it, and even she admits that she did not even understand global warming until a few months ago. Now what's that about? Like, it's and then she said every video she makes on global warming consistently gets the most down thumb votes, because she can see how many down thumb votes she gets by looking, at her back app or whatever. Consistently, whenever she does a video on global warming, people just despise it. They cannot handle it. Now people watching her videos, they're supposed to be science people. They're supposed to be physics people. Global warming science is 200 years old, and everybody just freaks out, and they can't handle it if she talks about global warming. So we're in a world of complete denial. Like, even supposed high tech science people, they refuse to talk about global warming. Yeah, but even climate Adam is in denial. Like, it's very simple. I've been talking about, okay, you kind of came on late, Sandy, but it's like, even the the supposed global warming scientists on YouTube, they will not even mention what Guy McPherson says. Somebody called it the McPherson paradox. Even Guy James E. Hansen, he now focuses on how the aerosol masking effect is the number one cause of temperature increase in the atmosphere right now. And it's very, very simple. It's like, even if we switch to renewable energy, that would just make the planet warm even faster. So all these supposed global warming climate channels, all they do is they talk about renewable energy, this renewable. We need high technology. You know, um, we need blah blah, like aerosol mask. We need albedo modification. Like Raymond Pierre Humbert, he says he's against all albedo modification. Doesn't mean I've corresponded with it about him, with this. It's like, even even the Mir project that Guy McPherson promotes, the so-called Mir project, it doesn't matter, because it does not address the cause of global warming. The cause of global warming is CO2 increase. Now, algae sequesters CO2 50 times faster than any other natural life on the planet. Oil is from algae. Very, very, very simple. It's so simple, that's precisely why it's being ignored. So that the crisis is being ignored and the solution is being ignored. Why? People are brainwashed by science. I mean, look at science. Galileo, he said, the only way he'd get funded by science is, he told the aristocrats, I will save you on labor costs. If you fund me, I will cut down your labor costs. So from the very beginning, science has always been this elitist, brown nosing project to the aristocracy. It, Plato, he got his science from a military engineer who was making catapults. Like, they want to double the size of catapults precisely, so they need irrational numbers. It's always science. Physics has always been about the military, about who can build the better projectile to, ejaculate their missile better into the other chimpanzees' territory. I'm too unhinged to do a show. Yeah, I've always been interdisciplinary. Like, you can't, like, the they didn't my nobody could understand my master's thesis. I couldn't even understand it. I had this guy contacted me, wanted to publish my master's thesis, and then he's like, but I don't understand it. And I tried to explain it to him, and he's like, he did a degree in physics, and then he publishes on music, and that was my master's degree. It was like philosophy of science about music. And then he's like, well, actually, my wife wanted to publish it. And then he goes, so then I'm like, okay, if he can't understand it, I'll read his books, and maybe that'll help me understand why he can't understand my paper. And then I read his book on fractals, and then he points out the yin yang, the tai chi yin yang is not a fractal. And I'm like, oh, because it's not a logistic equation. So when you have a logistic equation, even like chaos science, it's a lot that's based on a logistic equation. That's all commutative geometry. And so I realized that was the problem. That was the error I made in my own master's thesis, is that the yin yang is what they call non-commutativity in science. And like, okay, like Elliot Jacobs, I asked him about non-commutativity because he's a math professor, and he's like, I wrote a paper on non-commutativity. He got really defensive about it because non-commutativity, like the world's expert on non-commutativity. He's got a Fields Medal in math, and a Fields Medal. Most people never heard of a Fields Medal. It's much harder to get than the Nobel Prize. And so this guy Alan Khan, he's like, all of science, all of modern science is based on commutative geometry. Almost all scientists consider non-commutativity to be what's the word? Well, like I can't even think of the word right now. But even Roger Penrose, he got the Nobel Prize 2 years ago for his work on black holes, and he admits that the foundation reality of the universe is non-commutativity. But then he also admits he's not very good at non-commutative math. He published on non-commutativity a couple of years ago, but he's like he can't really do non-commutativity. They but okay, now if you study Alon Khan, he's got a talk on YouTube. He's given it several times. It's called Music of Shapes. He explains the truth of music. The secret truth of music is non-commutativity. Now that's my background. I was trained in music, and when I was a teenager, I realized I called it complementary opposites. And I said, this must be the truth of the universe. This is what harmonizes the whole universe. And I had this concept and I kept trying to explain it to people. And then I took quantum physics my first year of college, and he taught us non-locality, this my physics professor. And I realized this is the same secret that of the music theory that I had realized. And I wrote this home in a letter. I documented it. I put it on my blog. I have the quote from my letter. But I couldn't understand, I couldn't like academically put it together. I just kept calling it complementary opposites. I got my undergraduate degree in studying sustainability. I kept this music idea to myself. I did my graduate degree, and I wrote my master's thesis on music theory and philosophy of science. I'm trying to explain this concept. So this guy says, "I want to publish your paper." He's got a degree in physics. He can't understand me. So I read his paper. I'm like, okay, I was trying to say it was a logistic equation. I didn't understand that it's not a logistic equation. So what is it? Then I discovered Alon Khan's book. He had a brand new book in 2001. I discovered it at the university library. It was called Triangles of Shapes, or Triangles of Thought. He wrote it with two other scientists, and he discusses music theory in the book. And then I'm like, wait, this is the same exact concept that I've been trying to explain about music theory. And I'm like, wait, maybe he's just being metaphorical, because scientists, that's what they do. They use music as a metaphor, and blah, 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 resonance music. I'm like, it can't be the same thing that I figured out. So I just sat on it, and kept calling it complementary opposites. I would mention non-commutativity and I wrote a book in 2012. I compiled all my research from the past 10 years. I talked about non-commutativity. I didn't focus on it. And then I finally discovered Alon Khan's talk on YouTube where he's talking about music theory specifically, and I'm like, wow, it's precisely the same exact concept. My master's project was on attitudes towards sexual harassment in the workplace, between the male view and the women's view. I really hated doing it. It was boring. Well, yeah, but that's a very important topic. I mean, I could, what's the word? When it comes to that topic, I'm like in a whole nother realm of existence. Well, that's a good thing to have a career for. It's an important thing. I took women's studies as an undergraduate. I was literally the only male in the class, and it was at University of Wisconsin. There was like probably 200 females in the class, and I'm like the only male. And I took it as an elective, and I'm like, and then the house I lived in, it was run by feminists, and it was half women and half males. Like we were a cooperative, we were like a commune, so we'd have a weekly meeting. So we were required that it was 35 people living there. We were required that we had to have consensus. We had to rotate all the work shifts, and half the people living there were women. And so, like, I had my housemate was like, if you see a woman walking on the street towards you, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. And she goes, you go to the other side of the street. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like I got trained in feminism from my housemates, and then um I didn't, what can you say? Like I I mean, I I started to read ecofeminism. I read Vandana Shiva. Her first book was published in 1992. I read it in 1992. I think it was published in the late 80s. It's called Staying Alive. It's on ecofeminism. And then I actually met Vandana Shiva in 1997. She came to the University of Minnesota, and she shook my hand and said, solidarity. And I felt really bad for her because there was hardly any people there at her talk. There was like 20 people, and it's the University of Minnesota. There's like 50,000 people at the university. Okay. All right. Take it easy. Thanks for commenting. Anyway, so yeah, so I think the whole ecological crisis, if you like, I've been studying the radical anthropology research group, and there's this anthropologist named Camilla Power, and her whole thing is the origin of humans is from essentially ecofeminism. And there's this book called Blood Relations. I found it in a used bookstore. It's by her partner. His name's Chris Knight. He's a he was an anthropology professor, and he got like fired because he did guerrilla theater against the banker elites, and they're like, oh, he's a terrorist, you know. But then he still teaches or whatever. They're on Vimeo. They post some of their talks on YouTube. I actually reposted one of their talks. I downloaded it from Vimeo and I reposted it on my channel because I'm like, I got to get it out there. I posted Camilla Power's latest lecture, but I read his book Blood Relations, and it's basically like modern humans formed from the synchronization with the lunar cycle, leveraging photosynthesis is coastal plant phytoplankton. Yeah. Well, you got to realize that algae is actually cyanobacteria. It's not plants. So the cyanobacteria, it's, what can I say? It's 4.6 billion years old. It's the simplest life on Earth because it's a single organism. It's not a complex organism. Oh, really? Maybe you're, I don't know, typing too fast or something. I'm not sure. It sounds really interesting what you're doing there. It sounds complicated. The You bind it with electric current through the seawater. Yeah. I see. The thing about external technology is great, but what this guy Brilliant Planet is doing, Raphael Jovine, is he's just growing algae. Like he has two PhDs in marine biology, and he used to work for, I don't know, he did all sorts of high tech research at one point. And at first he was like, okay, they're trying to convert algae into fuel. And he's like, why are they doing that? They're asking the wrong question. And he's like, they just need to grow algae. They don't need to do all this complicated high-tech stuff. They don't need to genetically engineer it. You can grow algae as food. It's like, okay, we're about to have a food crisis. We need food. People eat spirulina all over the planet. Yeah, the algae, like the Qigong master Chen Yulin, he says the simplest is the most powerful. Now, algae, when you eat algae, it gets digested right away by your mitochondria. It does not have to go through normal digestion in your stomach. It just like assimilates right to your mitochondria because that's what algae is. It literally like is mitochondria. I don't know. I mean, I don't know all the details, but mitochondria comes from algae. No, fungi is, oh, you have algae. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. See, there's algae. It could be phytoplankton. See, there's different kind of algae, but the algae. See, when they call phytoplankton, they include algae in phytoplankton, but algae is actually cyanobacteria, and so sometimes they'll call algae when it's really phytoplankton, but then sometimes they'll call phytoplankton when it's really algae. Blah blah blah. It's like it's a what they're talking like spirulina is actually cyanobacteria, and so it's a single cell organism. It's the oldest life form on Earth. It's the simplest life form, and it relies completely on photosynthesis. And so It's the most efficient energy conversion of storing CO2. You can get Yeah, you can order algae kits. I've looked into it. I was watching all these how to grow algae videos on YouTube, and I'm not joking. Every video on how to grow algae, they're like, "This is my video. I'm going to show you how to grow algae." And every one of them did not say where they got their algae from. Like you need algae to start growing algae. You need a culture kit. And I'm like, they're like, "Okay, if you want to grow algae, you need you know you gotta add some minerals to it so it has food. You need a tube to put it in. I'm like, okay, but where does it you need algae? Where does the algae come from? And so I posted all these comments. I'm like, can you please just say where the algae you had to start with algae? You're telling us how to grow algae. Look, I really want to grow algae. Just please tell me where to grow algae. One guy said one guy said he went and harvested it, and it wasn't like spirulina, it was some kind of other weird algae he got from a pond, and he's like, "I keep it alive in the pond, and I bring it over." He never said that. He posted, like, 5 videos about him growing algae on it in his backyard and stuff. All these cool he was an engineer, electrical engineer, he had all these cool water pumps and all these tubes, and not one video did he actually say where he got the algae from, it's, like, so bizarre because why? Because it's biology. Like people don't want to talk about the biology algae. They want to focus on all the high tech stuff. I used to grow it in my fish tanks. Plucky. I think you mean plucky. What's plucky? I don't know what plucky means. This is literally how Raphael Jovian got started. He first saw algae as a problem. Like he had two PhDs in marine biology, and his first interaction with algae was as a problem. Like, oh, it's taking over the lakes, it's killing off everything else. And then he's like, wait a second, if this stuff grows so fast and it's so productive, maybe we can leverage it. Maybe it's a good thing. Like, and and I had the same thing. Like, what? Plecostomus? All right. The alien fish. I used to have some fish too. Nice. Is that fish native to New York? Is it one of those ancient fishes? I used to have a activist zine that I called Paddlefish First, and I had a big paddlefish on the cover, and then it said over 200 million years old because that's how old the species of paddlefish are, and they're pretty much extinct in the wild. They're only kept alive by the DNR, doing like a whatever, like you know what I'm talking about, where they have to add the paddlefish, and then they still get like caught in the dams, and they're supposed to migrate like 200 miles, and they live to be like 40 years old, and they have electrical signals. They use quantum. They call it uh, quantum telepathy. They call it like synthetic telepathy or quasi telepathy. Oh yeah, sucker mouth catfish. Okay, tropical freshwater fish. All right. Yeah, I used to have a poster of fish on my wall. My aunt, I'm just having this flashback now. She gave me these posters of native trout and salmon, from the Pacific because she had moved to California. But it's like, look at those native fish now. I mean, the native like the I I worked in a salmon factory in Alaska. We processed the fresh salmon. I processed the fresh crab. We would work 20-hour shifts. I worked so long. After a 20-hour shift, you go to sleep, and my arms were still moving in my sleep while I'm sleeping in deep sleep. My arms are still going like this. When my daughter was young, I had 7 fish tanks. I stopped fishing. I even went to camp fish when I was 14 years old. I went to camp fish. That's how serious fishing is. Have you ever heard of Babe Winkleman? He still has a fishing show on cable. I think he's from Minnesota. I didn't know this, but he like designed fishing lures. Like that's how he started out. And because Minnesota, the license plate says land of 10,000 lakes, but I think Wisconsin maybe has more lakes than us. But we both of our states have like over 10,000 lakes in them. And I stopped fishing because the mercury pollution from the coal plants, and then like you're using like lead sinkers, and I mean and the lead breaks off and it falls in the lakes and the fish are eating it, and it's not good. I couldn't handle it anymore. And also all the runoff from the lakes are eutrophic, and that's another thing with algae. You're seeing all this green scum in the lakes, and you're like, okay, maybe we can leverage the green scum. We can, yeah, they have to buy krill, yeah, right. Well, yeah, like if people eat shrimp, there's from these terrible shrimp farms. I just signed a petition today that they're gonna sell genetically engineered salmon. And they don't have to label it. All these restaurants where you go buy fish and you go buy salmon, it's actually secretly genetically engineered farmed salmon, and that stuff escapes. And the salmon farms are like really, really bad, polluting, and so yeah. So anyway, it's like okay, well, can algae turn everything around? I don't know. No, I always take over the comments section, you know that. It's about time we turn the tables. You you you've earned a lot of comment posts from all my comment posting. So, um so yeah, 20 years ago I'm like, okay, the future of life on Earth is algae one way or another. That's all I want to know from Jim Massa. I want Sandy needs to ask Jim Massa, can algae survive? Even if the oceans die, like, is there like deep? Okay, you need photosynthesis for algae. I know there's extremophiles, life. They say that life on Earth, like, maybe started off like those hot vents in the ocean floor, where it's all sulfur, like the bacteria are living off sulfur and they don't need photosynthesis. Maybe that's all that's going to survive. I don't know. Um, oh yeah, cool. Okay, so I guess we can wrap it up here. Anybody got any more questions or comments? I'm gonna repost this link again. This is why I started posting. Um, just to summarize, I realized we were doomed by 1996. I kept it to myself because what's the point in telling anybody we're doomed when nobody's gonna believe me and there's nothing we can do about it anyway? I kept doing activism because I didn't see any other job worth doing. I worked part time just so I could keep doing research, just to really confirm that we really were doomed and what was the problem with modern science and how could we get around it. I finished my master's degree training in non Western philosophy. I discovered that ghosts are real. Ghosts really do exist. Unless you go deeper, you can go into a deeper level of consciousness where you can bypass the ghosts, you can heal the ghosts. And a study with the spiritual master. He's got an energy healing center. He works with the doctors from the Mayo Clinic. His name's Chunyi Lin. He can see inside people's bodies. He can literally see inside your body. He can see your past lives. So there's a whole different level of reality that modern people do not know about. Modern people are literally brainwashed by having left brain dominance. If you go into this natural resonance of reality, then you won't fit in with modern society because it's like all of our food, like Jim Massa says, our food lacks nutrition. If you use wood ash, they say, well, that's your best way of getting nutrition. I farmed with wood ash and human manure compost. I didn't do a very good job of it. I'll just say that. I'm not doing Discord. I'm not. I'm already deep enough into the interwebs as it is. I'm not going deeper into the interwebs. If you if the NSA tells me to join Discord, then I'll do it. Let's just say that. I don't believe in like some private place to discuss. It's all controlled by the NSA anyway. So I'm not trying to, I don't believe in technology like, oh, we can have some secret technology that's better. Yeah, YouTube's good enough for me. If like people Okay, Noam Chomsky says self-censorship is the worst. Like people, okay, Noam Chomsky says self-censorship is the worst form of censorship on the planet. People literally, they won't even talk about Guy McPherson, the basic, you know, okay, James Hansen, he's talking about it, but even he can barely get his papers published. He's like, we really struggled to get this last paper published, to get it through peer review. They want us to change it, and he gets it published, and then people just ignore it anyway. Like he's saying the IPCC is wrong, and he was the original big global warming scientist. So if anybody's credible, he should be credible. But the whole thing's been politicized. I mean, if you look at the history of science, like Naomi Oreskes, I read her first book, and she wrote about the scientific debate about continental drift being plate tectonics. It took 40 years for scientists to agree that plate tectonics existed. And it was a big battle between the British scientists and the US scientists. The British scientists were relying on empirical analysis. And so they realized that continental drift is real and that plate tectonics is real. The US scientists were relying on deductive arguments. And so they had already created a wrong model, and their whole process of deduction was wrong because they had the wrong assumptions that their models were based on. So Naomi Oreskes, she wrote this great book, and I read it in 2006. I was promoting it on this Guerrilla News Network that I'd read. I'm like, oh, this Naomi Oreskes book is excellent. So I was very happy that she then focused on global warming, and then she discovered the same thing I discovered, that science has been totally corrupted by these corporate, junk science takeover, and she's still doing that. She's still focusing on how science has been corrupted by this whole free market corporate ideology that's fake. I discovered that in my undergraduate degree, and so then but if you look at her first book and you apply it to global warming, the same problem exists. You have the wrong deductive models in the U.S., and so the IPC is saying, oh, the methane abrupt eruption in the world's largest ocean shelf, it's not a problem. Maybe it'll happen in 100 years. Why do they say that? Because they're relying on the wrong models, and that's Michael Mann's problem. Michael Mann's now admitting that the models are wrong, but he's like, oh, we need to correct the models. So it's like the empirical data is telling us that we're way beyond correcting the models. We're in survival mode. We're like, are we going to have food next summer? That's where we're at in the actual empirical data. But meanwhile, the scientists are like, oh, we need to correct the models. Like, if we can only fix the models, maybe we can predict things better. It's like, no, we don't have time to predict things anymore. you know and why don't we have time to predict things? Because of the natural tipping points are going to be triggered by the aerosol masking effect. So any policy, it's like the scientists are like, we need better policy. It's like, yeah, I knew we needed better policy. I knew that 30 years ago. I told my university colleagues, my fellow students, I'm like, we don't need more science. We should focus on policy. I focused on policy work. uh, any of these scientists are saying we need to focus on policy, ask them, what policy have they changed? I did policy activism directly at the university. I met with the general counsel who runs the university. I met with them 9 times over a year with the PR department that runs the university. They finally did a policy change only after I declared I'm going to go on unlimited hunger strike. And the president of the university emailed me begging me to please not go on unlimited hunger strike because I've accomplished enough already. And then he did the policy change. Now, that took me 1 year as a volunteer. Before that, I had to cry in public to these overpaid administrators about slave labor being used by Total Oil in Burma by the military regime, doing deforestation, clear cutting. I said, what could be a worse example than this? I said, I'm doing this as a volunteer. There's plenty of other issues I could be working on that are more important. This is the most blatant issue, and you guys won't even address it. You won't even acknowledge it. I started tearing up, and then they finally acknowledged it when I had to cry in public. I debated the whole student senate, and I won the argument. They passed the resolution. Only the president of the student senate was not in attendance, and then he decided he was going to veto it. And it's like, blah blah blah. So then I got all the cultural centers to support me. So then they hired the PR department to try to go behind my back, and to but they couldn't do it because I was ahead of the game and I already got the culture centers to support it. This. So we got the initiative to divest $1.5 million from Total Oil. It got passed. Was a progressive treasurer, African American lady. I thanked her. I thanked her in the hallway. It was in the summertime. I was at the regents meeting. It was just me and her. I said, "Thank you for getting this past the regents to divest from Total Oil for using slave labor with the military regime in Burma, deforestation." She said, "You're welcome. And next, I'm going to work on divesting from tobacco companies for the obvious reason that they use slave labor." And she's African American. And so what happened? Soon after that, the administration went through her voicemails, her emails, her personal background. Then they fired her. Why? Because she had declared bankruptcy in her past because she'd been too poor or something. She filed a civil rights lawsuit for being fired for the discrimination, and the judge threw it out. And then, like I said, I was working on another issue. I had an activist email listserv at the university. All of a sudden, I had 800 emails saved in my email account, and I sent out. I would send out the final meeting at this one issue I was working on. The general counsel who runs the university, the president comes and goes. He stays there. He was in the same law firm that my dad was in. I didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time, but and actually, my dad had left the law firm at that time, so he might not. But at any rate, he joked. He joked at this meeting. I hope the professors on this committee are tenured. And so I quoted him, and I sent it out to my activist email listserv to the whole university community. This is 50,000 people in the university. Next thing I know, all my emails in my account are gone. They're deleted. And I went to the computer center. I said, "How could this happen?" And they said, "The only way is administrative access. Somebody would have to use administrative access to delete your whole email account." So it's like, this is what they do. That's normal. I had another professor email me because I was hired as op-ed. He said he was he had one sentence in the email: "I will personally make sure you're never published in the Minnesota Daily again." That was the university newspaper serving 50,000 people. He had bragged that his personal mentor was Werner von Braun, who had been a SS majors supervising extermination, forced labor, people being exterminated. He had bragged that this was his personal supervisor. So I said, well, if he's going to brag about it in our graduate newsletter, maybe he should point out that this guy was a Nazi SS major who personally supervised forced labor that was being exterminated. And so his response was, "I will personally make sure you're never published again in the Minnesota Daily." Well, it's like, okay, so well, fine. That was my last op-ed anyway for the semester, so I didn't really care. And then he had to sign off on my graduate thesis. He was my graduate director. They wanted to just get rid of me, so he signed off on my graduate thesis. Nobody understood what so that was my and then to finish my research, I did this non-Western meditation through the African Studies Department, and that's how I discovered that ghosts are real. In our modern way of reality, our physiology, we're totally cut off from the source of reality. We're all brainwashed by like left brain dominance and right hand technology, and so we're all fixated on these external solutions that are somehow going to fix reality. When in fact, the oldest life form on Earth is the only thing that can save us. Algae it's like scientifically proven that algae is the only thing that can save us, but everybody's going to ignore it. Why? It's the simplest thing. Yeah, well, some of us, I mean, we're lucky. We're pretty lucky. Um, Maybe not for long, but if you move to the Horn of Africa right now, they had drought 7 of the 8 rainy seasons, and they had flash floods, and now they're going to say like 40 million people are going to be a food emergency this summer. So it's not. I mean, everybody likes to fly in airplanes. Like almost everybody flies on an airplane like once a year. Well, why not just fly to the Horn of Africa? Like if we think we're lucky, like just take a flight into, I don't know, whatever the capital is of whatever, like I don't know, Ethiopia. You'd have to go to like north of Ethiopia or maybe Kenya. Go to north of Kenya. Um, where there's a lot of Somalians where I live, and I used to hang out in the Somali restaurants and cafes. They thought I was Italian. They'd come up to me and they go, "Are you Italian?" Because Minnesotans are so conservative. Because they wouldn't, like, they would set up a shopping mall. What complaints in my job? I'm just ranting. What? Oh yeah. No, not that. Okay, if you want me to talk about UFO aliens, I personally saw a TR-3B military aircraft, which is the equilateral triangle with no fuselage. It makes a deep humming noise. It's a military craft, and if you research it, I saw it in summer of 1997. I could have hit it with the rock. That's how close I saw it. Now, if you research those craft, they're military. They're not in the You can research. There's all sorts of military disinformation where they're promoting this ET alien stuff. It's so everybody wants to believe in ET aliens because the CIA and military have been promoting it nonstop. Through Hollywood, if you really research it, you can discover that. But of course, nobody wants to really research it because they're completely bombarded by indoctrination. Like when I was living in Alaska, I came back in 1991. I turned the TV on, and what's on TV? They're promoting military weapons. Like the television is just a big advertisement for the U.S. empire, military weapons, this, military weapons, that, and they're just glorifying it. And oh, isn't it great? We're ejaculating our missiles into this other country. Like Iraq was considered the West Germany of the Middle East. They had free healthcare. I mean, I'm not saying Saddam Hussein wasn't a CIA asset who was totally corrupt and evil, but he also was a nationalist, and so they had a higher literacy rate and free healthcare than any other country in the Middle East. Yeah, Missile Envy. Like read the book Missile. You're from Australia. You don't read Dr. Helen Caldicott. That's the name of her book, Missile Envy. Penis envy from Freudian psychology. Like supposedly females have penis envy. Well, she turned it around and called it missile envy. That's literally what it is. We're just chimpanzees with missiles. I mean, yeah, you could say that, but big deal. I mean the so like So, I came back from living in the wilderness. I lived in nature, like we were getting our water from a bog. We had no electricity, no heat, no nothing. And then I come back and the TV is completely filled with military advertisements like, "Oh, isn't it great that we're committing genocide in Iraq because we set them up for we wanted to control their oil." And then in 1998, I got arrested twice for protesting against the genocidal sanctions that were US led. And I wrote a paper for one of my graduate papers about how the US was going to invade Iraq again based on Noam Chomsky's analysis. And what did Noam Chomsky said? He said that the US wants to maintain veto control over access to oil. The US wants to maintain their petrodollar as the dominant currency in the world. And what was the third thing? The US wants to sell military weapons. Those were the three main reasons the US was going to invade Iraq again. I wrote the paper in 1998. I had no idea that anyway, I got to get going. I'll stop ranting. The instructor said my paper was too aggressive. Your paper's too aggressive. That was it. All right. That's my rant. Missile lust. Okay, take it easy, everybody. You guys can go chit chat on another Doomers channel. Keep the party rolling. Somebody else start live streaming and you could keep going. Okay, over and out. Cheers. Kumbaya and all that. Remember, like when you're in deep dreamless sleep and you don't know that reality exists, that's the truth. That's the truth of who you are. All right. See you tomorrow in class. Yes. Yeah, you're free to join class too, Bella. This isn't the real me. The real me is class time when I'm doing my class every morning. All right. Thanks. Nope. No. I can't do the chat, and you know why? Somebody keeps threatening to come and hunt me down with their martial arts. All right. Bye-bye.